Evening. Thanks for coming out. There's probably a lot of places, we could have all chosen to go, but I appreciate you coming out to hear my spiel on the Grey-Banded Kingsnake. I can tell you right off the bat that there are much more knowledgeable people, like a lot of us, that know Florida kingsnakes and whatever. There's people out there that grew up in this and they go to school for it and all that stuff. I know gray bandeds because I breed them. I've been around them for quite a while. So what is it most people understand or think about with gray-banded kings is that, one, there's a variety of colors of them, but there's a little bit of confusion that some of us have over the years of how these have developed and come along. And so when you go on the internet and the first thing you do is you look for gray-banded kings, you find something that's like this, which is all of these different patterns, all of these different varieties, color morphs, and so forth. And so I'm going to just real quickly, this won't be that long, we'll be able to hit dinner here within 10 minutes. Just kidding, it'll be a little longer, but we'll go for a little while here. But I'm going to cover a little bit of the morphology and how we got to where we are now, just recently in 2014 or so with the gray bandits, of how we catalog those. So the simple part of it is the morphology of animals and so forth, which we all know. And this is kind of where we started back in the late 1800s. And you can see how it's come down and gone through all the different variations of its species, of how it eventually hit Alterna in 1917. And then we get down into the 2000s where we start seeing a split. Actually in 75, we see where they start categorizing it as one actual species of snake. Well, before that, they always thought that you had Alterna in the east of Texas, and then you had the Blairi over in the west. And they always felt that there were these two different species. Well, in 75, they actually hatched out eggs and said, whoa, we've got both out of the same clutch. So there can't be two of these subspecies of the Mexicana or anything else within the Lampripeltis. And so then that's when they started determining that this is actually one snake. And then they started working on creating an actual, and well, that's where they get the Alterna blairi in the 2000s. And in as early as 2014, they realized that this is actually its own species and not a subspecies of the Mexicana that they originally thought. So real quickly, simple notes on that. So what are we talking about when we say Alterna and blairi and the difference between those? So what we have is the fact that they still consider it as a phase of the gray bandit. They are called Lampripeltis alterna, but there are two phases of it. One the Alterna and one the blairi. So the blairi, which is probably the most sought after one, it's usually the more colorful one. It has the brighter, lighter grays, but it also has the much bigger orange bands with just a little bit of the tracing of the black. And then you have this kind of white haloing that goes around between the gray and the black. And then you have the blairi, or the Alterna, which either has no orange, has mostly the black with the gray background, and they can come in this dark charcoal, they can come in a little bit lighter colors, but they have very small bands of orange, if at all. And one of the other appearances with the gray bandit is the bug eyes. Isn't that just a cute looking face? Most of our snakes that we have, like even say the black racer, they're born with the bug eye and they really don't grow out of it a little bit. Well, the gray bandit is no exception. It's born with bug eyes and it never grows into them. Whereas most of your other king snakes, that kind of goes away. So this is one of the distinctions of that. Let me go back to here. The thing that also is different with the blairi is right behind the head, out of all the patterns that it has the largest orange patch right behind the head. It's about 1.5 times larger than any of the other patterns that it has on it. So one of the issues that you have with the gray bandit is that they're so small when they're hatched. They're 10 inches. It's hard to feed them at that size, and I'll get in a little more with that. They grow to be anywhere between 2 to 5 feet. On average, they're about 36 to maybe 40 at full grown. I've got one here that's, maybe 30, 36 inches. And so then that's why the average feed is about to 3. The thing that we see in captivity, and you'll see some of mine, which is just what we do when we start them on mice, is that we overfeed them a lot and they do get really husky. And so when you see a gray-banded that's really fat and large, it's overfed. They should be skinny and lanky. The one on the right is a little bit overfed, and the one on the left should be what it is. It's a little thinner. Similar to what we see with our black racers now, because they're all living off of lizards, right? And so they're really thin. They don't get really big and bulky. So they're usually a little bit overweight in captivity. So the habitat of where they come from is near the Big Bend Forest over in Texas. And then right where the dip comes down in Texas area, there's an area called Trilingua. It's just in just actually west of Terrell County, and I'll cover a little bit of that. And then you can see where they come all the way down into Mexico, and then you see where they're almost touching where Leonis is, or Leonis. But this is where some people get a little confused on what the Leonis is, which is also the Theri, and also the variable king, all the same one, is a Leonis. And if you look at them, they're similar to each other as far as pattern and style. And so it's because they're coming pretty close to the same region of Mexico. So in the dip area, that's where up through to the area there, they're up in the mountain areas and in the crevices. And that's, that's where when you see things like this. And so they're in the middle kind of desert. It's somewhere about 90 degrees during the day, maybe up to 95. They're mostly nocturnal, so they're in these crevices. And so you don't find them just like going down the side area or whatever. They're actually inside of those little fissures, those little cracks and holes within the rock face. And they're just trying to root out lizards, trying to survive and stay out of the heat. And so in nature, you'd find them in something like this bluff up on the face of the rock. But because of our roadways, we have what's called rock cutouts. And that's limestone, and it creates a perfect area for their habitat for them to live within that. When most people hunt for these, they rarely just go out walking on the ground like we might hear, especially like in the Everglades or down the Okeechobee, and walk along grass lines. You either do road hunting after a rain where they come out looking for food sources, or you have to look in the faces of those rock cuts to be able to find them. They're not just out. And so this is the differences you start running into with the gray-banded, and what a lot of purists look for within the snake itself is the fact that you have what's called a locale and you have what's called a non-locale. And so in this case, you can have snakes that are on Juneau Road, Sanderson, and you can see the different patterns, and they're only within 10 miles apart. And yet you can still get all these different patterns from that. And so this would be something you'd consider a locale. So you have the Sanderson, we'll take that as an example. Someone would say 90 west, and that would be this pattern, and then you'd have 90 east, and then you'd have off of 285 or somewhere in Dryden or something. And they'll specifically try to mate that particular one with another, 90 west. And then they'll call it a purist, and they'll call it a locale specific animal. And so it only really matters a lot of times for those who are the purists that want to keep them exactly the same. A non-locale would be something where if you're doing a 285 and you're breeding it with a 90, and you get offsprings, they look nice or pretty and everything, but you literally sell them as a non-locale specific snake. Doesn't vary much in pricing, it's just whether or not you are a purist or not, but they're still pretty snakes. So they rarely are around other animals, like a lot of snakes. In this case, they are solitary, and only in times they come together is when they're trying to breed. And otherwise, these are the fissures and areas that you'll find them in, is these little rock crevices. And when they become adults, they'll pretty much eat a lot of things. Still in their normal native area, they'll do lizards, but they will eat frogs, they'll eat mice and so forth. But when we run into problems is when they're juveniles, when they hatch out. It's something instinct in them to only want to eat lizards. Rarely in their native environment do they just all of a sudden start seeking out mice to eat, even if they're little babies or pinkies and so forth. They just won't touch them. And that's one of the problems that we have in captivity. And so here they are, what they normally eat, a fence lizard, and then just probably another fence lizard, so forth. And so this is what they would normally be eating out in the wild. So when they're juvenile, this is what they're seeking. And when you have them in captivity, that's where you start running into some problems. So there's a lot of tricks, and I'll go over some of that here in just a second. I told you this was going to be quick. Go ahead.
So I guess they don't really travel that far, like what do you call them, the indigos, like they need like 200 miles.
Right, exactly. No, yeah, they stay within their own spot. Again, their environment's pretty hot, 90, 95. And so they're looking at just being, tucked away and eating and surviving in that way. They don't go miles away. Any other questions? No, pretty straightforward. I talk fast, so we're going through this really quick. So if you're having these in captivity, most people will put them in something like a 10-gallon aquarium. I prefer something a little larger because you want to do, with like most snakes, you want to do something that has a nice gradient between cool and hot. And their ranges is pretty strict in a way, because you're starting off at somewhere around 65, 70 on one side and something like 90, 95 on the other. And the smaller the aquarium, you end up creating this kind of greenhouse effect where even though it's hot here, it has no way to air out and keep cool through it. And it's easier, it's better, like in my case, I have the room, and the room itself is down to 75 or so. And then I just put a little bit of a light or some form of temperature on that one side, so that way it stays cool mostly in the environment, and then they can go to a hot spot for that. So it's much easier to work with them on that. So, typical for most king snakes is pine shavings and newspaper and so forth. Usually when they're like first hatch, it's usually newspaper or paper towel or something, so that way you can see how they're growing and see how they're doing. Because they're nocturnal, like a lot of snakes when they're nocturnal, you don't necessarily need a UVB or UVBA light. They're not going to use that for themselves anyway. I know there's a lot of people who argue that, well, still the sun's out even if they're not in it, and there can be still getting that. But there's not necessarily proof of that. Can you do it? Sure, as long as it doesn't overheat the cage. Sometimes we set up our cages our habitats to look like that, and that's fine. But in this case, you don't necessarily need it. You could use a CHE for light source or a heat source on one side. Very simple to take care of. If you've already had king snakes or already worked with king snakes, there's not much difference to these. Similar to ball pythons though, where they kind of come off and on feeding, they can do it. Most generally, you feed these guys twice a month. Otherwise, they gain weight and they get overweight, so you feed them twice a month. Give them a good meal, wait a couple weeks, feed them again. You don't have to overfeed these guys. And then they'll do fine. And it also keeps them from running off of food, which kind of tends to happen with them. I've got several that they go on and off food, and it's just so frustrating. So when you have juveniles, our biggest problem is that, like I mentioned, that as soon as they come out, they want lizards. They don't want pinkies, they don't want anything else, or they don't want to eat at all. So a lot of what we do are this, which we start at the top and kind of work our way down. Although what I've been doing is this last one of late, is that as soon as they're born, they're already on egg. They still have egg yolk in them. They still have it from the egg that they hatched out of. And so you can go up to about a month and a half on them, leave them alone, put them in a substrate, let them hide, let them do their thing. And then you can start from the number one top up there and work your way down, which are the typical things that we do. Just keep trying to give it pinkies, put it in a paper bag. We rub a lizard against them and see if you can get the smell off of them and get them to, you know, eat off that way. And then you can do the bait and switch. And then if you have to, we do either a tube feeding or the pinky pump if you want to go that far.
But if you have a lizard, why don't you just feed it to them?
Good point. So you can do that. The problem with it is, and I've done that, the problem is that they carry nematodes and a few other things, especially the ones we have here.
Oh, you're catching them wild then?
Yeah, because unless you raise the lizards yourself, which then you can keep that from happening, the only other source is to go out and get Cuban anoles or whatever, which they will eat. They'll eat them readily if you get them the right size. But they have all of those other things going on with them, and it transfers to the snake. And now you have that problem, which affects their eating habit. And they'll stop eating just because of that. Usually we do the rubbing and stuff first. Then a lot of times what I've done, and we're all adults, I can say this out loud, we make a slurry, you know, drop a bunch of dead lizards in a blender and grind them up, and then rub the pinky in that or something. Some people have boiled the pinkies a little bit to heat them up in, you know, like a chicken broth or something, or I've tried tuna, sometimes that works. You just try a bunch of different things, but it's a much better process to do that instead of immediately doing the lizards. You can do the lizards and you can get some strength into them, but if they start getting those nematodes and stuff, it starts to be a downhill thing that way. If it's a frozen lizard, you can do it with an ivermectin mix of some sort where you kill off anything that's in it. Plus, you know, if you freeze the lizard long enough, you'll kill them off anyway. But it's got to be, you know, some of them have been, you know, you can't do it for like a day or two. You have to go a little longer to kill some of them off. So that's pretty much where we're at with gray bandits. I know, it's not a whole lot.
No,
But
when they get older, they're eating pinkies and mice, right?
yes, usually when they start getting to about, it's like 15 grams or 18 grams. When they get to about 6 months to 8 months and you've gotten some weight on them somehow, then they'll start usually moving over to it. When they get to a year, year and a half, then they're starting to hit fuzzies and everything. The one thing about gray bandits is they grow really slow. And the one thing I didn't mention out was on it, they go about 25 years. So some have had them around 30 and more. So on average, it's about 22 years, 25 years for their growth. And they're real slow at that. I've got one that was hatched out in August of last year, and I have another one that's almost 2 years old, and they're almost identical. Now, a lot of that comes with if I'm overfeeding or if I'm feeding them, they're gonna grow and they're gonna get that size in comparison. But my other one eats really well as well, you know, is also. And so they're really slow growers to get them up to breeding size. So, yes, sir. John, the man with the hand raised, go ahead. Bedding?
Yeah, the bedding.
No more than what you'd find in a normal king snake. I keep mine on kind of a pine shaving that's been dried and stuff. You could use newspaper, crumbled up newspaper, that fresh stuff, that as well, and so forth. So a lot of people use them on aspen bedding. Most of my stuff and some of the stuff I know you have, you put a humid hide in it, then you can have the substrate as dry as you want. You don't have to have the whole thing humid. It makes it easier for cleaning. Keeps bacteria down because now you're only dealing with one source where the gray bandit's going to be or whatever animal is going to be in that humid area instead of the whole cage that has to be wiped down and sterilized. So if that's real dry and then you have a humid hide, it works great.
What is the best time to put together breeding?
Best time for breeding. So he told me he was going to start asking me all these questions. So that's fine. When they're ready. But no, you ask them, take them to dinner, find out. They, like most of them, you do want to go into a brumation. It's actually healthy for most snakes to do that. Some people don't do that, they just go through and whatever, but it is healthy to take a snake in and out of brumation. It's just part of their life cycle and it works really well for them. In their case, you're bringing them out in February, you're starting to put them together either late February or sometime early to mid-March. And then you can start putting them together at that point. And then within a month or so, they're starting to drop their eggs, and in about 9 weeks, the eggs hatch.
Do they ever eat other snakes? I know king snakes eat other snakes.
They can, but it's rare. Usually it's lizard eggs, lizards, and frogs, and then switching over to mice later on.
King snakes are the ones that eat other snakes, like the venomous snakes.
Well, yeah, the Florida king snake.
Oh, the Florida.
Yeah. And then the cow kings, thank you. If you, pretty much any of those. What's interesting about the Grey-Banded, though, is even though it's listed as a king snake, it's actually more closely related to the scarlet king and the scarlet king snake. So, yeah. So it's really interesting that it's there. And then, of course, if you know anything about the Therais or Leonis, there's a very close resemblance to what those are. But then, of course, they come out of Mexico, too. So, yes, ma'am. Well, temperature is going to play a lot of that because it's going to add to its growth and quicking, or within its growth in that, how quickly it will go through those stores. Mine that I've had, when I hit about the month and a half and I'm about ready to do the first feed, that's about when they're starting to shed. It's usually about 6 weeks. So, and then the more you feed them later on and everything. I've got one in here that just went through a shed, and sometimes, especially during the summer when I feed them a little bit more, they'll do sheds in every 2 to 3 weeks. So, yeah.
Are you breeding for morphing colors? Like, do you have a lot of requests for that, for certain colors and things like that?
No, it's one of the snakes that, again, talking about the locale and non-locale specific types.
So people want just that?
Yeah, a lot of people want Sanderson Road, Juneau, et cetera, based on those areas. And, you know, it just really kind of depends what somebody wants. A lot of them do want to go for color. Some like the charcoal gray ones that I showed. I try to do something that where I like the charcoal gray with a bright orange splitting the middle of it, and I'm trying to get a non-locale, which is what I have to post them as. When you put them on your table to sell, you literally have to tell people that it's a non-locale. You can tell them Juneau Road X Sanderson, but it's considered a non-locale. But I try to do it for me, I try to do certain colors like that. But I do have some that are similar. I do have some Sandersons, which is like the one on the right, that I do breed with another Sanderson, so, yeah. So, while we're still talking.
Yeah, let's see.
So what we have is this is my hatchling somewhere in here. Yeah, it's trying to scare me. Come here. So now this is from Sanderson Road. This is the, a Blairi.
Specific, the road. People know Sanderson Road.
Yeah,
Know that.
well, it's a big hunting area. That 90 and all of those, everybody knows to go those areas and stuff. So this one was hatched out in September, actually, of last year. This one is 1 3/4 years, so you can see the difference in that size. And so you can see how these are growing basically slower. See how much lighter this one is.
Yeah.
But these are the Blairs. Just calm down, little guy. I know, you're like, oh, I don't want to be here.
It's like,
So.
outsmart you, I can outsmart you.
Now this one is from an area called Loma Linda. And you can see how a little bit more dusty. He's really already shed, so he's, that's as bright or clear as he's going to be in his colors. So there's those. And see, you can see where this one's, as like a lot of little juveniles, they're kind of crazy.
Yeah.
And then how they slow down a little bit in between these ages. Now this one's 2.5 years old. Males are smaller than females. And so then, let's see, this one is a Sanderson Road.
Oh, that's pretty. That's almost the same as that one then, right?
Yeah. And so you can see this is the mama to this one.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Beautiful. Cool.
So there's that one. And then I brought one from the Black Gap region.
How old is she?
She is 3.5. And then this one from the Black.
How long can they breed for? I mean, how many years?
This is an alterna from the Black Gap region.
Wow.
So you can see,
The different bands.
yeah, the smaller bands compared to that.
I like the big orange band.
Most people do. Blairi is usually the one most people pick compared to the alternas. Get back in there, little guy.
He's like, I'm gonna get out.
I know. You want to hold? Should make you sign a waiver. If he goes to the bathroom on you, it's not my problem.
Okay.